What'd you think? We're back. What'd you think? Give me your thoughts right now, all of them. Go.
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing that kind of stuck out was the our order rate is higher than our production rate. So my first reaction was like, "Oh, that's amazing! That's really good news. It kind of gives credibility." But then I was like, "Okay, over what time frame are you measuring that? That difference? Because it seems like if you were measuring January to March, that probably wasn't the truth, or at least like mid January, late January to the end of March. I'm sure that was probably not the case." Um, so yeah, that was kind of interesting. Um, FSD like complete later this year. I thought that was pretty interesting, and I thought it was great that he actually clarified for us kind of nerds that hardware 3 he thinks will be like robotaxi capable. So I thought that was pretty good. But I mean, overall, I saw a lot of people in the comments and on Twitter seemed pretty unhappy or saying like it was like terrible report. I don't think so. I mean, it was not a home run for sure, but the long-term guidance, I think, like over the course of the last 2 hours, I think I've become increasingly more bullish on the company in the long term. I mean, think about what he was saying about this point next year, the position they're going to be in relative to GM Ford, everybody else. Like, oh my gosh, it's like, yeah, I don't know what's going to
Kind of
happen over the next
insane.
12 months, but after that, I'm just so I'm. It's like kind of unbelievable to think the shape that they're going to be in.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest thing is that I'm glad to see that the company did sort of address the guidance sort of misses they had in the last quarter
Yeah, that was
around
good.
margin. So that was good to see. They didn't just brush it off. It's like, hey, whatever. It's just, and they kept mentioning a crystal ball, but Zach did say, hey, I gave you 20, ended up being 18. Half of it was the pricing adjustments because of macro. The other half was because of one-time items. So that was good. That was very good that they owned up to that, because I do think it's important to build trust with the investing community when it comes to that, and kind of like own up to sort of like an error that you made. And I guess, yeah, it's impossible. I get it. It's very, very difficult to set an expectation out there for these margins and things. But I think it's very important for them to come out and say something like that. I think the tone I'm getting from them, and I'm very curious to hear, is that we're very much in a recessionary environment, and they basically said recession 1,000 times without actually saying the word recession, based on the verbiage
Hmm.
that we're using on certain macroeconomic times. How did you perceive that? Do you think that came across clearly, and that's why Tesla decided to lower its prices, because we're literally in a recession? That was my takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, I love that they didn't beat around the bush. I mean, I think the worst thing would have been if Elon just came out and said, like, oh, everything's fine, and if we have any weakness, it's like Jerome Powell's fault. He said like things to that effect. I think not very tactfully before, and I thought this time around he was pretty tactful, and Zach too, about saying, yeah, like this is an uncertain time. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, in terms of demand over the next couple months. But I thought they did a reasonable job kind of discussing the room that they've got around margins and everything like that. So yeah, I think it kind of ticked a lot of the boxes I was looking for them to tick. I mean, absent like some huge miss, like, oh, we actually have every single car that we produced already has an owner, and we've got a 6 month backlog, but it's just not showing up, like some crazy thing like that is just like a uber bowl fantasy. Absent that, I thought
Yeah.
it was a very strong, kind of grounded in reality uh update about the way that they're ramping. So yeah, I thought that was really impressive actually.
Yeah, yeah, I really did feel like they did a really good job setting expectations to the lower end. They said, "Hey,
Hmm.
margins." Basically the message I got is like profits will go down, margins will go down. We're gonna keep ramping volume, and in an uncertain macroeconomic environment, unless literally nobody's buying cars anymore, we're gonna keep lowering price to match the production of our uh, of our factory. Excuse me, our factory to
What
our
was that? Did you
right.
just lose a lung?
Off and a trying to say a word at the same time. Yes, I have a collapsing.
Bradford. Yeah, okay.
So that was that's what I'm getting. So this gives me, I think for this quarter, one of my errors that I'm going to go back and fix for the following quarters, that I'm still a little too bullish on their ability to surprise on the cost side in the near term.
Hmm.
And it's clear that that's not the case. It's clear that a lot of these things have room to go, and that their ability to sell cars at the pricing levels they started at the quarter clearly were not low enough to continue stoking demand. And if we take the guidance from the management at face value, saying that, hey, the lowering on the cost, half of it was literally because people are not buying our cars as much as we thought, which is kind of what they said, right?
Yeah.
Way.
Hmm.
Then at those pricing levels, then it's like, okay, so the economy is slowing dramatically. And so the check for me is going to be, okay, let me check the other channels. Let me look at Ford, GM, Hyundai, Toyota. And, as I look at those numbers, it kind of line up with the same thing. People have stopped buying cars. People are just not buying expensive cars anymore. And so, yeah. And so getting that sort of tone from Tesla as well reconfirms that sort of feeling that I have. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just thinking like the kind of inventory buildup that Tesla has had over the last, was it 3 quarters or so, has been a
Yeah.
drag on free cash flow, like Alexandra pointed out, and I think it's reasonable. But they're at like 11 days. What, you've been tracking GM a lot more closely. What are they at, 90 days now?
Yeah, well,
Something like
they're
that.
yeah, Chevy's around 55, and then Cadillac is above 60, and then Buick is at 100. So like
So you have
altogether, yeah.
you've had like all those, and that was at the level at the beginning of the year, right? So yeah,
No,
just
this was at the
that was
level like a
oh
week
okay.
ago.
Okay.
Uh
So that's
yeah,
been
like a week
updated.
ago.
But
Yeah,
I mean, they've got that like huge buildup, which has frankly boosted their historical earnings,
correct.
and now that you've got a glut of inventory sitting on there, and you're going to have to cut your earnings probably, or cut your production presumably. As long as those other companies are seeing the same kind of headwinds that Tesla is, and they're probably
Correct.
seeing them a lot more significantly. I mean, and your margins are getting squeezed, and you're trying to transition to EVs, and like you're getting crushed on that side of the business and the ICE side. It's just like
Yeah.
there's going to be carnage here.
It's a perfect
It's
storm for them
just,
almost. Yeah.
yeah. So
It's
yeah, it's not great for Tesla. Like Tesla's not going to post impressive earnings per share growth like a year ago I thought they would this year.
yeah.
But given the situation, like, oh, it was just
Yeah.
fantastic.
This is really, I mean, this is really shaping up to be a sort of for the next, say, 2 to 3 quarters, maybe 4 quarters, is shaping up to be a expect disappointing results, and check your signals to see if the long-term success of the company is still there. So check competition, see where they're
Hmm.
at, check Tesla's FSD development, check their 4680 development, check their ramping speed, check their ability to lower COGS, see if they can still reach that 1.8 million unit at whatever margin, right? And the stock will suffer. And I'm curious to see what multiple the stock market decides to give Tesla in this environment. Because if I'm looking at after hours right now, and if I pull up the price real quick, it's down 5.4% right now, I believe. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Yeah, so it's down 5.4%. So for folks that have, as Emmett was saying, bought this at the peak, then
Hmm.
this sucks pretty bad. If they bought recently, obviously this sucks as well. Are you surprised by the movement right now, or was this based? Is this kind of hitting your expectations based on how the company reported their earnings?
Yeah, it seems about right to me. I mean, the earnings per share number itself was fine, but the auto gross margin was certainly the weak point, and the fact that Zach basically provided guidance, which is going to force the analysts to go out and lower their earnings per share and like kind of margin assumptions going forward for future quarters. Like that's a kind of reasonable reaction for the stock, I think. I mean, he was saying how half the miss essentially was related to the price cuts that they introduced in the second half of the quarter, and then on top of that, there's the price cuts from today.
Right.
So like if you kind of compound those together, that implies like a pretty decent drop in gross margins for Q2 and beyond. So
Yeah.
even if they're reasonably successful in cutting costs in all the ways that Jeff was describing earlier, um, I don't think you're gonna do kind of be making a big dent in the gross margin hit that the just ASP drop's gonna require. So
Yeah.
yeah, this seems about right to me, honestly.